Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to wherever you may be joining from around the globe. Let me just let everyone else into the waiting room. If you would just bear with us for a few seconds. We've had a significantly overwhelming response today for this webinar, which I'm very pleased to see. See, we've got quite a few people joining. Just bear with me as we let everyone in. Glad to see a few familiar names. I see quite a few regulars from some of the previous webinars that I've done. It's always nice to see names that I recognize from previous webinars. Quite a few names I see from the webinar that I did on tax a short while back, and having to submit and completing tax returns and tax residency. Okay, just a few more that I'm letting in, and then we shall get started. I will, the same as last time, launch a poll during the webinar for those who would like to take part. It helps me to figure out what are the sort of demographics of the people that are watching my webinars, where they are in Asia, why they went to Asia, a bit more information about them. It helps me to fine-tune future webinars when it comes to creating and doing webinars. Okay, I think without further ado, I shall let others in as they come, but let me then get started with today's webinar. Right, there we go. Again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, no matter where you are joining from. Very glad to have everyone here on this call, on this webinar of living and saving in Asia, and then what are the alternatives to sending money back home? So let's get started. Let's see if that works. Having a little bit of a technical glitch with my PowerPoint, which seems to be stuck in a loop. And it doesn't matter how many times you test these things beforehand. There we go.
At Holborn Assets, we know that trust is the foundation of any financial partnership. For over 25 years, we have been more than a financial services company. We have been a trusted partner to over 20,000 clients with 26 offices across 18 countries. Our dedication to our clients has earned us a 5-star rating on Trustpilot with over 2,000 glowing reviews. As a fully regulated, multi-award winning company, we are trusted with managing over $2 billion in assets. Our team of fully qualified advisors is committed to providing you with personalized, market-leading financial solutions. Choose Holborn Assets, your trusted partner in wealth management and financial advice. Visit our website or call us today to start your journey towards financial success.
Right, so let's get started. Why am I doing this webinar today, and what is this webinar about? Well, very often when living abroad, people ask me or ask themselves the following number of questions, and believe it or not, the same sort of questions that even educated people and people in finance ask the very same thing. I remember myself when I was living in Asia, I had those exact same questions and had to look into those exact same topics. The first one being, well, where do I set up my investments and my savings? Because if you're living abroad in a different country, it means you have more options available to you. So what do? Do I send it back home? Or do I keep my money abroad? And what is the impact of that? What does that mean for my savings and my investments? Are there other or better options available to me now that I am living abroad? And then the other simplest thing is, do I keep my money, where it is now in RMB or Korean won, or Vietnamese dong or Malaysian ringgit? What do I do? Do I keep it in dollars or pounds or euros in a hard currency, in a US dollar wallet, for example? Or do I keep it back home in rands? What are the different options available in terms of that? Do I maybe keep it in different currencies, some of it in one and another, a bit of it in a different other currency? What are the tax implications when it comes to that, saving back home or just keeping my money and saving it abroad? And for those of you, I'll add this in here because it seems that most South Africans from around the globe do not know that if you're earning money abroad, you do still need to submit a tax return back home. So there are tax implications, even though you are living abroad and not earning an income inside South Africa. And then also, something that's been coming more recently asked is what happens when I die? If my parents need access to that money to repatriate my body, or if I'm a married couple and I've got kids, how do I make sure that that money passes on to my wife or to my husband or to my kids efficiently and quickly, and it doesn't get stuck in, for example, some investment or bank account somewhere, and now my family need to apply in Chinese in the local Chinese court to be able to have those assets released. An absolute nightmare that follows. So there's a lot that one needs to be able to consider, and hopefully within this webinar we will delve into those and make it in a simple way easier for everyone to understand. A little bit about myself before we get started. My name is Matthew Taron, and I've done quite a lot of these webinars. And I focus very much on international investment and financial solutions for that international market. I'm a cross-border financial planning specialist. My expertise lie in investment and taxes. So no, I'm not the car insurance salesman or the life insurance salesman. My expertise are purely in investment and tax. I have a very unique knowledge and experience that comes from having worked abroad in many different countries as well as back home in South Africa. And my familiarity with the different tax regimes helps in terms of understanding clients and clients' finances and investments when it comes from an international perspective. I have passed both my level 3 and level 4 chartered exams in the UK. I am a member of the South African Institute for Taxation. I have 2 tertiary qualifications, specifically in tax and tax law. I have a national diploma in financial management. I also have an advanced level qualification in financial planning, as well as estate planning. And sorry, my phone is somehow changed over to Mac. Now my phone's ringing on my computer. Little distracting. Hope that isn't too much of a problem. I've also passed my RE5, which is the regulatory exams required to be able to give advice from South Africa. A little bit about the company that I work for, Holborn. Who is Holborn Assets? Well, Holborn Assets, we started off just over a quarter century ago in the late 90s. And the way that this happened was with the expansion of the UAE at that time, with many of your expats flocking over to this region, now needing financial advice on tax-free earnings and savings. As a result, a very particular breed of financial advisor was required to follow and assist those expats with their offshore assets, their savings, their investments, in a tax-free world. Since then, we've grown quite considerably to the point that we are now the second largest independently owned independent financial advisory globally. We have several $1 billion in terms of assets under advisement, and we have licenses and offices in over 18 different jurisdictions spanning the globe, coming all the way out in the Far East at the bottom of Australia, up in towards Hong Kong, Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, coming through across into, now I've got to remember my geography, Saudi Arabia, Dubai, into Africa, in South Africa, Namibia, into Mauritius, Europe, Portugal, Cyprus, Spain, and all the way out into the other end in the US, managing, as I said earlier, that several billion dollars. And because of that unique size and reach, we have a very unique proposal and solution for clients, and that we're able to choose from clients from around the globe solutions that match them, not just solutions from our homes where we're based. We also get offered preferential rates because of that size and reach, which is very often a very good thing for our clients. The 5 things that make our company different and stand out, and explain also what, not only why people choose to do business with us, but also why we have grown so successfully, is that size, the fact that we are the second largest independent wealth advisory globally, our independence, the fact that we can advise on any solutions from a number of providers from around the globe, not just the company where we work for back home. So we're able to choose with great impartiality when it comes to solutions for clients. I probably shouldn't say it in webinar, but I always tell clients, if this was 5 years ago and I was working for a big blue company back home, you and I, it doesn't matter what conversation we're having today. We both know that I'm going to give you a solution based with that particular company. Whereas with Holborn, being paid homogenous across the board, we're able to choose from a large number of investment companies, providers, and different products from around the globe. So we're able to find a solution that suits you and what you want to be able to achieve. Our service levels, the fact that you'll see we win many international awards. Most of those are very often for service. The fact that we are always keeping our clients up to date in terms of market conditions, changes in legislation, any new funds or products within the financial world. And this is why we tend to be, award-winning companies every year. Our education, the fact that, like myself, your financial advisor or wealth manager, such as myself, we're the most qualified and best educated in the industry. You're not going to find anyone else as qualified. And that fact that we are all across the board throughout our Holborn offices required to be internationally qualified. And then finally, safety and security, the fact that we take client safety and security of their money very seriously. We often look for solutions in jurisdictions where there is some form of government-backed investor protection or reinsurance scheme, so that if something goes wrong, your capital is safe. Right, so let's get started with the most basic question. Why do people save? Why do people invest their money? And very simply, what is the difference between savings and investment? Savings is keeping what you have left, and usually for emergency. It's that short term. Investing is making that savings grow. So why do people save or invest? Well, very often they're two different fields. That short-term need. You need money for an emergency fund. If I break my leg or something goes wrong, I need to fly back home because my mom or my dad's sick. You need money that's quickly available, and it's often referred to as something usually to last you for the first 6 months of if something goes wrong. And that's your emergency fund. Or you want to finance future studies. You want to take a year off next year or the year after to go and study an MBA or do your master's or something else. It's that holiday travel. I'm planning to, I don't know, explore all, is it 7,701 islands of the Philippines? I didn't get anywhere near close to that. Or perhaps to get married. You want to have a major wedding and invite everyone all your friends and family, and you need to save up for that. Those are generally short terms. There's things that you're going to do within the next 1 to 3 years. Then you get more the investment side of things, where you want to make your money grow, and you're making it grow for that medium to longer term. You want to see real return. And that is for financial independence, that being able to have enough money where you're not living month to month, where you're able to do the job you want to do rather than the job you have to do. You've got enough, your wealth that you've saved up and that you've invested and built, there's enough there for you to be able to live off. It'll cover your basics, your food, your transport, your utilities like electricity, rates and taxes, your medical aid, your accommodation. So if you're going to continue working, which most people generally do, you're doing the job you want. You don't have to worry about I really want to be that writer on an island, or I really want to be a teacher, but teaching is not going to earn a decent income. But I don't have to worry about that. I can go pursue my passion because I have enough money. Or if I want to be able to retire, I can retire early if possible. It's that building up that financial security, that having that nest egg, knowing that you have something that if everything goes wrong or something happens, you have a nest egg that's built up, something that you know you can rely on, that's tucked away. It's ending up at 50 or 60 and not living month to month, or having to live, on a salary and having to work in a job you don't want to be there, but you have to be there because where else are you going to get any money from? It's also so that you don't end up returning from Asia many, many years down the line and still have nothing to show for it. And believe it or not, obviously in my line of work, I do a lot of work helping South Africans in particular, amongst some other expat foreigner groups. I have a lot of South Africans when it comes to setting up their savings events. So many people reach out to me, and you'd be surprised how many reach out to me and say, Matthew, I'm coming back to South Africa next year because I'm 58 years old and I can't get a job anymore. My school's not going to hire me anymore. And I haven't been saving. I don't have anything. I've got my severance. What can you do to help me? And it's, believe it or not, it is a true story. I had a couple in Asia where the wife was 58, the husband was 60, and they were now moving back to South Africa. They'd been in Asia for a significantly large number of years, and all they had to bring back with them was their severance. And that severance was only for a few years. So in Rand terms, it was about 300,000 Rand at that time. Now, I'm not a miracle worker. 300,000 Rand, it's barely going to get you through your first year. You'll pay for your accommodation. You've got to buy yourself a small car, and by accommodation, I mean rent for at least the first year. You've got to buy a small car. Then you've got to, it's the refrigerator, it's your stove, and it's not the big things, the lounge suites and that sort of thing when you move home. It's, well, for me at least, it's the knives and forks and the chopping board that you don't budget for. It's those smaller things, and 300,000 is just not going to cut it. Also, at that age, being age 58 and 60, both of them being teachers, there is no way you're going to get a job in South Africa at that age as a teacher. So you don't want to end up in that same boat. You want to make sure that when you come back, be that in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, 15, 20 years' time, you do have something. And you'd be surprised. I always say there are two types of people that I meet: those who have left South Africa and are never coming back, and then those who've left South Africa for just a year or two to explore. And oddly enough, it's always those that have left for just a year or two. You speak to them 5 years down the line, and 10 years down the line, and 15 years down the line, and they're still there. Which is why, if you think you're only going to be there for a few years, but you're really enjoying it, as I told someone in a recent meeting, I have never met someone who has said, I regret saving. I've met many, though, who say, I regret not having saved. And then there's obviously that breaking that poverty loop, or black taxes, as we know it in South Africa, that you want to take care of your family back home, but you want to make sure that not everything is going towards helping family, that you're building up something in your own name so that when you reach that sort of level of age where you want to be able to be financially independent or retire, that you have something to be able to support yourself, that your own children one day don't have to support you because you have nothing from having supported your family. And you end up in a loop where every generation is having to support the previous generation and never reaching that point where they have their own wealth to look after themselves. So your own children then suffer having to look after you. There's being able to save for children's education one day, and then also for those who want to be able to build a property portfolio. I want to be able to come back and buy 2 or 3 properties and rent them out, that sort of thing. I have done a few property webinars in the past. I recommend that you watch them. Perhaps I'll do another one in the near future. For those of you who are saying that I'm not coming back to South Africa, because I get this very often, ask yourself, do you have a different passport? Because if you don't have a different passport, you will have to come back to South Africa, because many of your Asian countries do not give permanent residency. A lot of the time, your residency is based on your visa, and that's your ability to be able to work. So once you reach that age where you can't anymore, unless you have a different foreign passport, you will need to come back. One of the solutions that I provide for many clients abroad is that ability to be able to have what's called a citizenship by investment. So at some point along the way, getting some kind of investment that at least allows you that second passport to be able to live and work in Europe, South America, the US, or somewhere else. So now that we know why do people save and invest, and you can hopefully figure out what is it, if you're watching this webinar, what is it that you want to be able to save or invest for. And in a previous webinar, like I said, think of wealth as a journey. If you know where you're going, then I can tell you what type of transport to use. But if you don't know where you're going, then it's difficult for me to say what mode of transport. And that's, I find, the bulk of my job when it comes to talking to expats in Asia, helping them figure out, well, where are they going? What is that destination? And then being able to figure out the journey ahead. So first things first, irrespective of what reason you're saving or investing money for, irrespective of that destination, that goal, why, let's go down to basics and say, most simply, whether it's for 5 years, 10 years, or for whatever reason, where do I do it? Do I send my money back home or do I keep it abroad? And the way I approach this is just simply, what does your gut tell you? Very often guts are important. They are often more right than wrong. So what does your gut tell you? If you think of your own money, your savings, money that you're trying to build and protect and make worth more, what does your gut say? Should you do that in South Africa or should you do that abroad? What are your own personal views in South Africa, South Africa's future, and where do you see South Africa heading? And then decide where you should send your money. So something that I often find helps is think of it in terms of, just put it on I like seesaw. So think of it on a scale of 1 to 10. Think of that sort of seesaw. Which way are you going to be heading? What does your gut tell you? And if you're in the middle at the moment, do you see South Africa going down that scale towards 1? And I like to call that the Zimbabwe route. Do you see South Africa in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? Do you see things staying as they are or going more towards that Zimbabwe route where we still have a devaluing currency, where the rand becomes worth less every year? Politically unstable. At the moment, we have a government of national unity somehow. With land expropriation, and believe it or not, the last year when I did this webinar, land expropriation was always on the cards, and it was always being warned that the government wants to do it. The government wants to do it. They're looking into the legislation. They try. Now it is official. It is legislated, and it is a real thing. So where the government can take your land, corruption, high inflation, high unemployment, crime and violence and unstable power supply. Do you see things continue like that? Or do you actually see things getting better? What does your gut tell you? Do you think honestly that rather than going that Zimbabwe route, we'll go the Singapore route, as I like to call it, where we have a strong, stable currency, where it's politically stable. Inflation is low and under control. We have low unemployment. Most people and youth have jobs, where the economy itself is stable. The power supply is stable. It's a safe country to live in. Do you see things going that way? And very simply based on that, if you see things going that Zimbabwe route, then it's probably better not to send your money back here. If you see things honestly going that Singapore route, then sure enough, send your money back to South Africa and save it there. And if you see things staying as it is in the middle, well, then you've got that 50-50. And I don't believe any financial decisions should be made on the toss of a coin or 50-50 decision. But the other side of this is that, well, if you keep your money abroad and things do go the Singapore route and things do get better, well, you can always bring your money back. But if you send your money back and things don't go the Singapore route, they do go the Zimbabwe route, well, then it's too late. You can't take your money out later because it'll be worth significantly less. So first step, what does your gut tell you? Keep it abroad or send it home. That should be your first port of call in terms of deciding what do you honestly do. Trust your gut. Now, if we look into some of the underlying issues around that, let's look at the currency, the rand, because that was the other thing. If I'm sending my money back home, inherently, most of the time it's going to be sent back and it'll be in rands. So how does currency affect your savings and your investments, whether you save in rands or whether you save in dollars, pounds, euros, or some other currency? Now, The easiest way I've found to be able to explain this to clients is to think of the currency, the money of a country, as the share price of a company. Let's call it South Africa Limited. What does the share price of a company tell you? It tells you how healthy that company is. It tells you whether people actually want to buy those products or not, whether there's demand for it, whether the management is good or not, whether the CEO has control and there's good vision and foresight and there's growth prospects. It's going to be a company that's earning good returns, so you want to be able to buy those shares. Same with the currency. The currency or money of the country tells you a lot about that country. It tells you about the health of the economy. If it's got a good, strong value, it usually has a very healthy economy. Whether people have a strong desire for its goods, its services, its exports, how well the country is being run and managed, the trust that the country or the people of the country have in its president and its cabinet, the CEO and his board. It reflects the future expectation of earnings, of growth within that company, whether the country's GDP is growing or whether it's shrinking, what is happening, just like the share price does. And this is where there are two terms that many people use, either devaluing or depreciating currency. There's an expression in the investment world: you never invest in anything that starts with an R. That would be the rand, the ruble, the rial, the rupee. Who knows why? It's just one of those things, and coincidentally seems to be of truth. So ask yourself, when you look at the currency, the rand, is it a strong currency that tends to gain value, or does it generally lose value? Now, if we look at it over a medium to longer period, here we're looking at the 20-year slide. And on average, whether we're looking at euros or dollars or pounds, if we compare it to other hard currencies, on average, you're losing around 5% a year. Now, another way of looking at that is, imagine you have money in a bank account and it's in rands. It means on average, if you were a Brit or you were an American or you were a European, you'd be earning minus 5% interest on that, because it would be losing 5% of its value every year. So let's look at that in more detail. And this is one of those, I actually ask this in so many of my meetings, and you'd be surprised when I ask accountants this, I get also, no one tends to get it right. If you were to guess how much the rand has gone down over the last 30 to 40 years, so say since 1985, 1995 to now, what would you guess? How much do you think it's devalued? And this is generally where I tell people, so think of a percentage. How much do you think it's gone down? And I often like to tell people, think of a ridiculously large number and then double it, and we'll see if you're close. Surprisingly, I very rarely have anyone who comes anywhere near close. So in your own minds now, for those of you who are watching, think of in percentage, think of a ridiculously large number, double it, and then we'll see if you are anywhere near. So if we look at the dollar versus the rand, over that last 30 to 40 years, you can see it's a clear downward slide. In 1985, it was 1 rand 38 to the dollar. In actual fact, in 1982, just 3 years prior to that, it was stronger than the dollar. It was 80 cents. But let's, for the sake of today's argument, say we're only going to go back the 30 to 40 years. So from 1985 to 2025, it went from 1 rand 38 to 17 rand 61. There we can see at the bottom of that slide, 17 rand and 61 cents. Now, if you were to take a calculator, and if you have a calculator with you, or like me, if you have your phone with you, because who uses calculators anymore? If you have your phone with you, open up your calculator app. And on your calculator, very simply, put in 1.38. So that's 1 rand 38. Then click the plus button. And then click 1,176.5, so 1.38 plus 1,176.5. Then click the percent button and click equals. That gives you 17 Rand and 61 cents. Now, for those of you who did do the calculator exercise, how many of you guessed beforehand? When I said think of a ridiculous number and double it, how many of you guessed 1,000 or 1,100 or even 800 or 900? How many of you guessed maybe 50% or 100% or 200%? And what this essentially means is, imagine for a second, we're sitting in the Starbucks in Shanghai or in Seoul, or we're sitting in Hanoi, and I'm telling you, I have this brilliant investment for you. It doesn't matter what we're investing in. I have this brilliant investment for you. It's a property, or it's an investment fund, or it's it's commodities. But I have this brilliant investment for you, and over the next 30 to 40 years, you're only going to lose roughly 1 to 1,500% of your money. Would you still invest in that? Now, I've never had anyone say yes, they would still, but yet somehow everyone still sends their money back into rands. And then that is exactly what you are doing. That's 1,176% down in the last 30 to 40 years. So you've got your gut telling you where you should, back home or abroad. You've got the currency side of it where there is just no argument there. It makes no sense to do it back home in rands. So what then about tax? And this is the one thing where it really ekes me, because I love tax. And that is, it makes no sense on any level to take money and send it somewhere where you're going to be paying more tax on it. But unless you really like paying tax, I've yet to meet people who like paying tax. I've met people who don't mind paying tax. But I've yet to meet people who like paying tax, particularly in a country where you don't feel you're getting the value for that taxes. So if we look at South Africa, now South Africa, like the US, like France, like the UK, we're known as a high tax jurisdiction. Why? Because taxes are fairly high in South Africa. Now, in Korea and China, they are lower tax jurisdictions, simply meaning that you pay less tax there than you do back home. Now, if we take a look at the average income that someone, an expat living in Asia would earn, you're looking in paying, if you have that same income in South Africa, you'd be paying 31 to 41% tax. However, in China, the average would be around 20%, so significantly less. In Korea, that same tax on that income would be on average around 3%. So significantly less. And the lowest tax rate, by the way, in China is also only 3%. So if you're paying that circa around 3% tax or 10, 15% tax, why on earth would you send your money back to a country where you will pay tax at a higher rate? If we look at countries such as the Isle of Man, for example, or Guernsey, the Bahamas, Gibraltar, Malta, there the tax rate is 0%. So, ask yourself, if I'm going to be sending my money anywhere, do I want to be sending it to somewhere where I'm going to be paying more tax, or do I want to be sending it to somewhere where I pay no tax? Bear in mind that the income that you earn abroad, as long as you've been out of South Africa for more than 6 months, is exempt from tax in South Africa. Meaning, although you still have to submit a tax return and tell South African Revenue Service that you're earning money there, you don't have to pay tax on that money inside South Africa. It is exempt. So you've got tax-free money, but now you're sending it back to South Africa where it can be, part of the tax net over here. So how do we make money grow? If you want to send your money somewhere where you're not paying tax, what do? Well, you can send it back to South Africa and you can put it in a tax-free savings account. It's a brilliant thing. The problem with that, though, or you can put it into a retirement fund, a pension. The problem that we have with that, though, is that if we go back to that tax-free savings account, you can only save a maximum of 3,000 Rand a month, or you will end up paying a tax penalty of 40%. Now, if you're paying between 3 and 20%, why would you want to go and put your money somewhere where you could possibly end up paying 40% tax on it? Again, but a lot of people don't have access to that sort of advice and information. So simply, you're in Asia and you're thinking to yourself, do I send my money back to South Africa where it'll be taxed at 18 to 45%, or do I send my money somewhere where it'll be taxed at 0%? Surprisingly enough, 99% of the people that I speak to do the first option. They send it back to South Africa. And even with a lot of the polls that I've done online, you'd be surprised how many people do that because they just don't know any better. Now, again, that South Africa being known as a high tax jurisdiction, anything that's income in nature gets taxed at up to 45%. Anything that's equity, so if you're investing in something that earns dividends, you'll be taxed at a fixed rate of 20%. And anything that's capital in nature, you'll pay tax at a rate of up to 18%. Versus, again, setting it up in somewhere like the Isle of Man or Guernsey or somewhere else where you pay 0% tax. Again, you can put into your retirement fund to an RA, but for someone living in Asia, that is probably the worst advice a local South African financial advisor can give. Why? Because he just doesn't know any better. Because when you take that money out, you've taken money that now is exempt from tax, so it's tax-free. Put it into something where when you finally do get that money out and when you retire, it must be taxed as income. It cannot be taxed as capital, which is at a lower tax rate. It cannot be taxed as equity, which is a lower tax rate. It must be taxed as income, which, as you can see above there, is the most expensive form of tax. So why would you do that? Or there's the tax-free savings account. The problem with that is you can only save 3,000 Rand a month or pay tax penalty of 40%. So, and you're never going to reach the point where you can afford properties or be financially independent or even get a second passport, anything, if you're only saving 3,000 a month. If we look at what the local companies have to say, should you be saving money tax-free or should you be saving money in something that is taxed? There is just no argument. Any company you look at, any website, any bank, any financial institution, any calculator that you use, it is obvious that tax-free savings, so sending it to somewhere where you pay 0% tax, is much better than sending it somewhere where you pay tax. For example, with that tax-free savings account, here's 10x saying that more time, more money, more tax saved. It's as simple as that. If you had a tax-free savings account with 10x and you were putting in 3,000 a month for the next 13 years, if you're paying tax on that, you'd end up with 1.7 million. However, if it's growing free of tax, you could end up with 2.2 million, 30% more. So why, unless you don't want more money, why wouldn't you do that? Discovery, again, not using a tax-free savings account. Well, here's why you need one now. Tax-free savings is simply better. Sanlam, it tell you the exact same thing. Old Mutual, they will tell you the exact same thing. Any company out there will tell you that tax-free savings is the best way to go in terms of growing your money and having more money later on. So why would you not then want to save your money in a tax-free environment? The other side of it, though, is, and this is the problem with that 3,000 Rand limit inside South Africa, that, as you can see from ABSA's warning, that if you save more than that 3,000 Rand a month or 36,000 Rand a year, you can be subject to a 40% tax penalty. Alan Gray as well, in their fine print, also say, if you are not already paying tax and you are not investing in long-term, then the tax-free account may not provide significant benefits. So it's for people where you're not paying tax and where you are saving less than 3,000. Otherwise, again, they say you will pay a tax penalty of 40% on any amount you invest above that maximum of 36,000 a year or 3,000 Rand a month if you're doing it on a monthly basis. Problem is, most people don't read the fine prints. So we know then, A, to just recap very quickly, what does your gut tell you? Abroad or send it to South Africa? What does the currency side of it tell you? If you're going to lose 1,500% over the next 30 to 40 years, would you do it? If the answer is no, then obviously you shouldn't be sending your money back. And then there's the tax side of it. Do you really want to be sending your money back where you're making it taxable instead of keeping it somewhere where it stays free of taxes? And then comes something else called Regulation 28. Because if we're going to go that tax-free savings option is only 3,000, but you need to be able to save more, so by some miracle you've been, I don't want to say duped, but you've been given a retirement annuity. So you're sending your money to a retirement annuity where it'll become taxable later instead of now. Retirement annuities, pension funds, are subject to something known as Regulation 28. Regulation 28 limits what you can invest in within a retirement fund. It also limits where you can invest. Now, it is very clearly stated in terms of Regulation 28 that 55% of your money or your funds has to be invested inside South Africa. Not only that, there is the danger of prescribed assets. Prescribed assets is where the government can go and say, right, all pension funds now need to contribute 10% of their money to the new national health system that they want to build. Or it needs to go to bail out Eskom, or it needs to go to bail out SAA. And one could say that's not going to happen. This is, it's impossible. It's not. There is actually legal precedence, and it has happened in the past. It also limits within your investment portfolio how much, and it has different quotas and limits on how much can be invested in property, how much can be invested in equities, which asset classes you can invest in. So having a retirement fund in South Africa is all very good and fine, but remember that 55% of that money must be invested into South African companies. I will have a Q&A at the end. I see some people have raised hands, so we'll have a Q&A at the end, and then you're welcome to ask your questions then. So where to then? You got your Regulation 28. You also have added to that something called Section 65, which limits what funds you have access to. Now, for a fund to be marketed in South Africa, so available to your financial advisor or your private bank or your broker in South Africa, it must be Section 65 approved. So if you have a South African product, it needs to be Section 65 approved. And which funds, how do you become Section 65 approved? Well, you need to have an office or a representative in South Africa, and you need to pay annual fees to the government and registration fees. So you'll find very often your big international investment companies and investment funds, South Africa is just a small little country at the bottom of Africa. It's 0.6% of the global economy. Are you going to pay fees and set up an office for... They'd much rather get their money in Europe and the US and other parts of the world where there's much bigger marketplace. Now, if we look at what that means, essentially, I find the biggest way of doing this is very simply, in terms of approved funds under Section 65, there are around 630, which is 0.4% of the 131,000 different investment funds, open-ended investment funds that are listed out there globally. So very simply, it's like going to a huge buffet breakfast and only eating the bread. Sorry, you can't have the sausage. No, sorry, you can't have the bacon. No, you can't have the eggs. No, you can't have the muesli or the yogurt. Sorry, the juices are all off bounds for you. You can have some bread, though, and only the bread. Why would you limit yourself to only the bread if you are able to invest or feast on all the other things? If we look at the largest financial service provider in South Africa, if you were to open an investment account with them, in terms of access to different funds, that particular financial advisory or financial company has access, you would have access to around 260 funds. That's your local South African funds and the international funds that they give you access to. Now, that local FSP is worth around 22 billion. Whereas if we compare that to what's really out there on a global perspective, that equates to 0.2% of BlackRock, or just 1.4% of Franklin, or 2.9% of Goldman Sachs. So it honestly is going to a buffet and well, not even being able to choose from the breads, because no, you can't have the croissants either, or the sourdough. You can only have the Albany bread. I'm not saying Albany bread is bad. It's normal, regular bread. It's not sourdough or croissants. So again, sending it back home, you have all those other options, but you also have that restriction in terms of where and how you can grow your money. So does size really matter? How important is that? Well, very simply, I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but there is South Africa, that small little square, or 1, 2, 3, 4. It's got 5 sides. 1, 2, 3. I don't remember what they're pentagonal. So yeah, I think it's pentagonal. So you've got that small little country at the bottom over there, which makes up 0.6% of the global economy. But you're going to send everything just to that one little country and do it there. So how important is that? Well, very simply, if we look at that, just simply the brands. Are you saying you don't want to invest in Google? You don't want to invest in Amazon? You don't want to invest in Toyota? You don't want to invest in BP? Or you don't want to invest in Apple, or all these other different brands? Looking at that, does it matter? If we look at the world's top 500 most valuable brands, so the Fortune 500 list, the top 5, if we look at those companies, it's your Apples, it's your Googles, Microsoft, Amazons, your Samsungs. If we look at the Southern Hemisphere, there are only 2 countries in the Southern Hemisphere that has any entry in that top 500 globally. And it's not South Africa, it's Brazil and Australia. South Africa has no entries in either the most valuable or the most recognizable brand categories. Oddly enough, and I'm sorry, I'm laughing because I searched to see the South Africa's most recognizable brands, and I finally managed to come across a article for the most recognizable and most valuable brands in South Africa, and their image, believe it or not, on that article, which you can see here, it has South Africa, but if you look closely, not a single one of those brands that you see are South African brands, not a single one. Now, just to put things into perspective when you're choosing where and how to invest, the most valuable brand in South Africa, so if we look at the most valuable top 100 brands in South Africa, the most valuable brand in South Africa is actually FNB, valued at around $3 billion or 54 billion rands. Now, if we compare it again to that Fortune 500 or that Fortune 100 list, if we take the bottom, so we're not saying the top number 1 company on that Fortune 100, if we take the bottom number, so the number 100 on that Forbes top 100, take their worst performing company at the bottom of the top 100, it would be Volkswagen, valued at 111 billion, or otherwise known as $1.9 trillion. So our top performer is, and they'll put into numbers for you, is 97% smaller than the bottom performer of that top 100 list in terms of the Fortune 100. There you can see 54 billion versus 1.9 trillion, either 35 times smaller in value or 97% smaller. So again, it's very easy to look at things and say, oh, it's worth 54 billion, and then you look at it and you think, compared to other countries and other companies, it's child's play. So what then are the alternatives? What can we do if we want to be able to save our money somewhere where it isn't a hard currency, it's not losing that 1,500% over the next 20, 30, 40 years, where it has access to global markets, where if you want the bacon, you can have the bacon, or if you want the pork sausage, you can have the pork sausage. Starting to show how English I am now. Trying to think of it. If you want the boerewors, you can have the boerewors. Or if you want the the scrambled eggs, you can have the scrambled eggs. You're not stuck to just the bread. Where you can save it in a tax-free environment where and where no company on earth will argue that it's not going to grow better because it's tax-free. It will grow better. So if you know that's what you want to do, what are the alternatives? What can you do? Well, firstly, speak to someone with the licenses, accreditation, experience, and knowledge to actually set up those investments abroad. Again, like I say, not that big blue company that I used to work for when I first came back to South Africa, where, again, if I work for them, I'm going to give you one of their products, which is going to be inside South Africa and it's going to be taxed. Invest in dollars, pounds, euros, Swiss francs. Invest in a hard currency where your money isn't losing value just because of the money that it's in, because it's in rands or something else. Go for well-known, established international companies that have the licenses and are highly accredited. Look for something that has tax-free growth with access to those global funds, and also where those fees are not based on the value of your investment for the rest of your life, but where those fees are based on a fixed period rather. You get different fee structures from around the globe. I did a webinar on costs as well. I think it was a year or 2 years back. I should do that again too. Comparing international fees versus your South African style fees. There is just no argument. South African fees are horrifically expensive. Right. So just to summarize that then, a RA or a tax-free savings in South Africa, that gets you that tax-free growth, or an offshore form of regular savings or disciplined type of savings. You had that Regulation 28 restriction, 55% of it must be invested in South African companies. If you do it abroad, there is no restriction. You have that Section 65 restriction of funds that are registered with the government, whereas there is no regular restrictions on your fund choices if you want to be able to invest outside. With an RA, you've got no access before age 55, or now with the two-part system, you have a third access at a higher tax penalty. Whereas very often in your international offshore savings platforms or regular savers, you have a 2-year period where you don't have access, but after that you start to gain access. In terms of restrictions, again, at retirement, 2/3 must be, if you're going to go that tax-free, must be taxed as income. There is no such restriction abroad. In South Africa, fees are based on fund value, whereas internationally fees are often based on an initial period, depending on the length of the investment, usually around 2 years. And then the bigger issue that I have with many of your South African style retirement annuities and tax-free savings is that they need to be paid out in South Africa, whereas at least with your international products, they can be paid out globally. So there we go. I will open it up now to questions and answers. Something that I did forget to do, let me launch that very quickly, is the poll. If you wouldn't mind answering those questions on the poll, like I said, helps me to figure out in terms of future webinars where I can fine-tune those webinars, what type of information I need to be giving, what sort of person is attending these sort of webinars. So I have now launched the poll. If you wouldn't mind completing those questions. You can see, whoopsie, I'll go back quickly. You can see that my contact details, if you would like to reach out, I am on WeChat, I am on Kakao Talk or on WhatsApp. You can email me, matthew.ron@holbornassets.com, or you can reach out to me on Facebook Messenger. It's giving my age away there. Mind you, I'm not too scared of how old I am. The important thing is I don't look that old. The other side of the thing is you can see also I'm on many of the expat groups in Asia, and on most of them I am the group expert when it comes to finances and helping the groups weed out financial scams and making sure that things are above board. I see there are quite a few people busy completing the poll. Please, if you wouldn't mind, the rest of you, in terms of taking part in that poll, it does help a significant amount in understanding the demographics of the people that are that take place or join these sort of webinars. Now, if I can, let me see if I can raise on your screen, you should have a Q&A screen. So do I, Q&A. Let me see if there are any questions abroad. Please, if you have any questions, now is the time to ask. I see someone asked about the RAs and the taxes. Hopefully, I did go through that earlier. But essentially, if you have a retirement annuity, otherwise known as an RA, you're taking money that at the moment, while you're living abroad, is free of tax, and you are putting it into something where when you take it out, it has to be taxed as income. Um, and obviously, South Africa's income tax is very high. So very simply, that's why um, an RA, if you're living abroad, is probably the worst thing that, and actually, no, it's not the worst thing. There are worst options. It's one of the worst things. The other thing that's extremely bad is if you are living abroad and you have an endowment policy or an endowment investment back home through one of the big life insurers like Old Mutual or Sanlam or Alan Gray or any of those sorts of companies. Why? Because an endowment policy income is taxed at a fixed rate of 30%. So if you're living in Korea, for example, you're taking money that's taxed at 3% and making it taxable at 30%. Why would you want to pay 10 times more tax? So don't. Um, if you're living in other parts of the world, and even if you're living inside South Africa, if you're paying less than 30% tax, an RA is the worst. Sorry, not an RA, an endowment is the worst thing for you because you're making your income taxed or fixed at that 30%. So whether you're living abroad, whether you're living in South Africa, if you pay less than 30% tax, don't use an endowment. And remember, your money abroad, you need to submit a tax return, but it is exempt in South Africa. So if your effective rate should be 0%. So, 30% compared to 0% is a ridiculously large number. Right, what other questions are there? I see someone asked about tax-free savings. And so in terms of tax-free savings accounts and SARS, what many people don't know, this is obviously someone who's seen one of my previous posts on one of the groups. Yes, so your banks, your financial institutions, your investment companies, they all have to report to SARS twice a year. Every 6 months, they report to SARS if you have a tax-free savings account. So if you have a tax-free savings account back home, SARS does know about it. And the client that I had that got into huge trouble recently with a 150,000 Rand fine was because her accountants, believe it or not, they were using accountants, or she was using an accountant to submit her tax returns, but the accountant submitted that she was unemployed because she wasn't working in South Africa. However, she was working abroad. SARS came back, audited her, and said, "You're saying you're not earning any income, but you've been putting 3,000 Rand a month into a tax-free savings account. So where did that money come from?" And then it turned out, SARS found out, obviously, from her that while she was working abroad, and obviously, but you said you weren't working. The money that you earn abroad, if you are working abroad, must be submitted on your tax returns inside South Africa. You're welcome to reach out if you need help in terms of that, and I can put you in touch with someone. But yes, you do need to declare that. So rather than take money, send it to South Africa, make it taxable, keep it abroad where you can keep it tax-free in a legal way. Any other questions? There's always that. Okay, there's a question about trading. For those of you who don't know what trading is, or day trading, that's doing it yourself, buying and selling shares on, for example, easy equities as an example, versus investing with a fund management sort of approach. The one thing I can honestly say, I have never met someone who does day trading who 5 years down the line still has the money or has more money than what he would have had if he followed a normal sort of investment philosophy. Um, I did a webinar on that too a while back. The statistics just are, I think it's less than 1% of all day traders actually make more money or make money or don't lose their money. And it's one of those where I'd have to look up that webinar, but the statistics, you can look at it on my YouTube channel. Less than 1% actually make money. And of all the people, I've never met a single person who 5 years afterwards that's told me, "Nah, I'm doing this or I'm doing that," has actually managed to make money. The other side of it also is that most end up losing money. Why? The concentration risk as well, because generally you're not invested into a few hundred different shares in different companies, and you don't have the time to do the research. You don't have the time to be awake 24 hours a day. You're investing into things in the American market and the UK market, but you're in Asia and you're asleep when all of that's happening. So there's a lot at play there. All right. Any other questions? No. All right. I'm going to leave it there then. You are welcome to reach out. If you do have questions, you're welcome to reach out to me in terms of, let me stop sharing my screen so that you can see me. I see a few people have raised their hands. Rather than raise your hand, if you have a question, type your question in the Q&A box or even in the chat box, and I'll be able to see it there. Or is something not showing on my side? Let me quickly have a look there because I see numbers going up, but I don't see it. Oh, there we go. Now I'm seeing a few more questions coming through. Let's see. What happens if I already have an RA back home? Do I continue with it or look to cancel it? Well, very simply, if you have an RA back home, if you've had it for, I would make it paid up because with RAs, you can make them paid up depending on the amount. So reach out to me, depending on the amount that you're contributing towards it. Look, having some savings is better than having no savings, even if you're going to be taxed on it at the end. So depending on the amount that you're putting into it, if it's enough that you'd rather put into an international savings plan where you're not paying tax, then the best thing, absolutely, make it paid up, meaning stop it. Don't add more money to something that's becoming a tax problem. Rather, put into something that doesn't become a tax problem. So if you have an RA back home, my advice would definitely be to make it paid up and rather put your money into something where you can save that money and where it's not taxable at the end. Very simply. Some people, I say, they'd naturally rather use their banks back home and hopefully go to a tax-free country or open a bank account there now. Well, put it this way, the interest that you're earning, for example, if you're in Korea, the interest that you're earning on your bank account there is going to be so negligible that it's not going to be taxed or earning enough money to be able to become taxed. And also, remember, banks are that slow and safe. You're not going to be earning 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20% growth in a year. You're going to be earning between that 0.5 to 1.5%. So it's not going to be growing significantly, not significantly enough to be able to cause a tax problem. Again, though, remember, as Korea as an example, it is a depreciating currency. It loses value. So again, do you want to put your money into something that's losing value? Would you rather put it then into something that is in dollars, pounds, or euros, where it's not losing value? I was speaking to an American yesterday in Korea who's been there for a number of years, and she's managed to save up 300 million won. And like I told her, when I first started working in Korea back in 2005, 2006, it was 900 won to the dollar. So, in other words, a million won would get you around 1,000. No, how do I do that? So, a 900, no, 900,000 won would get you $1,000. Now, 1.4 million won will get you $1,000. So we've gone 500,000. It's costing you 500,000 more now than it would have costed then just to get $1,000. So it's also a depreciating currency. So you don't want to be keeping it in won. You also don't want to be keeping it in RMB. So yes, although you instinctively want to use your account where you are, but don't keep it in Korean won or RMB or in dong. Put it again into a hard short-term cash, not a problem. But for that medium to longer term, it makes a massive difference. So for that medium to longer term savings and investments, you don't want it in your bank account. You want it in something where it's in primary currency and where you can grow it. Money that you're going to spend next year or the year after, generally you don't need that to grow significantly because you need it to be safe and you want to be able to access it and spend it. And you want it, that slow and safe versus the middle. Answer that live. If you invest through, so someone else asked, if you invest through a company like Holborn, for example. Now remember, Holborn is not an investment company, so you don't give your money to Holborn. Holborn is an advisory. So our job is to, for example, take a look. This is Tom, who's got a South African passport living in Abu Dhabi. What's the best solution for him? Or Tom has a South African passport living in Malaysia, or Tom has a South African passport living in Korea, or Sarah has an American passport living in Korea. What does she do? Or, Sally has a British passport living in China. What does she do? Our job as an advisory is to say, right, based on where you are, the passport you have, the options that are available for you, the taxes that surround you, this and that, this company in that particular jurisdiction would be the best sort of solution. So your money goes directly through to them. And very often, for example, if you're in Korea, as an example, the exchange control is of such a nature that if, say, for example, we set up your investment with Royal London, your money goes directly from you to Royal London. It doesn't go to Holborn or through Holborn or in any way connected to Holborn. We are simply the advisors on it. We tell you how to do it, and we tell the investment company how to invest those funds for you. Hopefully that answers your question. Someone has a tax question. This is not a tax webinar, it's a savings webinar, but I'll answer it. I haven't been submitting. If you haven't been submitting your tax returns in South Africa, reach out to me. I'll put you in touch with someone who can then register you and get your tax returns up to date. It's one of those things. SARS isn't bothered about the person who didn't know they had to submit returns or has missed a few tax returns. SARS is bothered about those who deliberately don't submit tax returns. So, and it's always better if you come forward and you start to submit your returns than them doing an audit and saying, right, we've audited you, you're missing tax returns for the last 5-6 years, and now we see you have this and that sort of investment or savings, and where's your money coming from? Then you end up in trouble. So reach out to me. I'll put someone in touch with you who can help you in terms of that. If you didn't notify SARS that you're working abroad and you keep sending money to your normal bank account, well, very simply, and you want to invest in property later, well, very simply, if you've got a tax number back home, and remember, what are you doing with that money? You just leave it in your bank account? Because eventually, if it reaches the point where you're earning enough interest, which the banks will report to SARS, you'll have outstanding tax issues. And you'll have to settle those tax issues first, and those may include tax penalties. So yes, it could become a problem later on. So rather than let it become a problem, fix it now. Where does one start to look for an accredited financial advisor abroad? You could reach out to me, and I'm more than happy for you to look at any of my Trustpilot reviews, any of my online video reviews. You can ask anyone about me. You can also, if need be, I can send you obviously not on a Zoom call like this with people from around the globe, but in email I can send you my ID number, and you can specifically search for me on the Financial Services Conduct Authority's website and check to see, am I licensed? What am I licensed in? You can also then verify my qualifications. And there, again, you'll start to see that I am licensed inside South Africa, but also in terms of my qualifications and expertise, I have a lot. I'm internationally qualified, not just South Africa. So you could do that. Always, do homework. Always check that a financial advisor is licensed, and then also check. I spoke to someone this morning, a friend of mine painting his house, and he's complaining about the fact that at the local hardware store, everyone's giving him different advice. Very simply, it boils down to the same as in South Africa when it comes to financial advice. Your Sanlam advisor is going to advise you on what Sanlam sells, nothing else. Your mutual advisor is going to advise you on what Old Mutual has. Discovery is going to advise you on what Discovery has. Investec is going to advise you on what Investec has. None of them are going to go and tell you, look, I'm sorry, for you actually, something from Royal London and the Isle of Man would be a much better solution. Why? Because A, they don't have the license to be able to do that, or the accreditation experience or knowledge to be able to do that. So you want someone who can. I've answered that. So where do funds come from? If you're living in Korea, you can fund your investments directly from Korea. It doesn't have to go to South Africa first. If you're living in China, though, China, because of exchange control, has very different rules. In Vietnam, again, you can have your money go directly to the investment company. China, you can only send money to your own account in China, which becomes a problem then, because obviously if you have an investment in the Bahamas, for example, or you have an investment in Europe, or you have an investment in the UK, you can't send it to the investment company. You have to send it to yourself. So inherently, for most clients in China, you would need to send your money back to your South African account. And if you don't have a South African account, it's not a problem. I can have someone reach out to you and help you set up one, a US dollar account in South Africa for that exchange purposes. If, though, you're living in China and you're one of the few lucky who have a Visa or MasterCard, then you can send the money directly to the investment company. It's just that obviously with Union Pay does not allow that, and most cards in China are Union Pay. You mentioned Guernsey or another country. Yes, there are a number of countries where one can, and there's a lot of countries around the globe where you can invest tax-free. There's a lot of the countries in the Middle East, a lot of your Channel Island companies, a lot of your Gibraltar, Malta, the Isle of Man. There's Puerto Rico, there's Malaysia, there's the Bahamas. There are a number of countries, but obviously which country one recommends for a particular client boils down to safety, security, and what type of investment you want and what your needs and goals are. That narrows down the list of countries. What your requirements are. Many clients, for example, want to make sure that their money is protected from forced repatriation. That way the South African government can force you to bring the money back to South Africa, even if you're not here, which is true. It's something that does exist. There's legal precedent. Sanlam in 2015 was forced to send money back. Okay, I think I've answered most of those questions. Thank you, everyone. I see everyone has done the poll. I appreciate your time. I look forward to chatting. And if you have any questions, reach out to me. WeChat, Kakao Talk, WhatsApp. I will send a recording of this to your emails as well. So please have a look out for that. Thank you for your time. Enjoy your weekends and have a good evening. Goodbye.